How do I know where I'm supposed to rotate? Am I supposed to rotate for a case like this? What about this? Or this? Well, in short, you should only rotate when it's appropriate. How do you know if it's appropriate? Well, that's what I'm going to go over in this video. These are the top 3 places that you might be rotating where you don't actually need to. The first one is rotating to use RU moves when you could easily use LU moves or maybe hedge in a pair. This is quite common, especially with a case like this. And what a lot of people do here is either do a Y2 and solve this like this, or they solve it like this. Both of which are quite inefficient and require 2 rotations. Here, it's much faster and more efficient and saves a rotation, makes it look ahead easier. It's just overall better to solve this pair into the back with LU moves. And you might be thinking, well, my LU turning is bad. Well, then you need to go and work on it, because if you don't have good LU turning, you can't be fast, because you need to be able to vary your solutions to use LU turning. Otherwise, you just rotate so much that you can't be possibly at a sub 8 level, sub 7 level. You just can't get there, right? Second place that you might be rotating unnecessarily is rotating to find pieces. Now, if you're sub 20, you probably don't need to worry about this, because I imagine you're not doing this, or at least if you are, then you should address this immediately. But for those of you who are over 20 seconds, a lot of the time this happens in a case where you've just solved your cross and you're just kind of having a look for your first pair. And if nothing pops out to you immediately, then maybe your first instinct is just to rotate and try and find something. Now this has 2 main downsides, one of which is that you'll probably just end up with a bad pair because you're going with the first one that you see, and the second one is that you're rotating the whole time until you find that pair, so that you're just taking up time rotating, which is inefficient and just wastes time. So here, you're much better off to just do U moves to find your pair, and you'll see pretty easily, okay, I've got this pair, and then you can solve it very easily, right? Rather than rotating here, and then maybe finding this pair and solving that. And then you end up with, this is your next case, which isn't great, right? So you want to make sure that you're not rotating unnecessarily to find pieces. And this isn't only after your cross, you can do it can happen in many other places as well. Third and final place where you might be rotating where you don't actually need to is in your F12 pair solutions. And this kind of ties in with the RU stuff, like rotating to do RU over LU or doing a hedge or something like that. And it's very complicated. Like there's some cases where you shouldn't rotate, some cases where you should rotate, some where people rotate when you actually shouldn't, and all sorts of, it gets quite in-depth, right? So I won't go over everything in complete detail, but I will go over the few cases that you probably are rotating for where you might actually not need to, and you probably don't know these ones. So starting off with this case, this is a case that I think most people would either rotate here and solve this into the back like this, or they would do it from the front left like this. But there's actually a really cool trick here where you can just put this pair into here and do F and then like this and then insert it. And that's really simple. And it's really fast too. Like it's really fast too. And you can do it very quickly, saves a rotation, and there's basically no reason not to do it. This is the next case, which is where you have this pair going into the back left here. Most people either do a Y2 here and solve this into the front right like this, or do a Y prime and solve it like this. Both of which are much more complicated and worse than the most simple way of solving this case, which probably some of you have already seen, which is just to put it here, L, U2, L prime, U prime, L, U, L prime. Very simple. With this case here, you might be thinking it's kind of similar to the first case I mentioned, where you can do this. And for some people, that might work. But in general, if you are a right-hand dominant solver, you don't want to do that, because lefty F moves like that is pretty difficult to execute well. So in this situation, I would say this is a situation where it's worth just rotating and solving it like that. Especially if that's going to be your front right slot as your last pair. That's definitely worth it there. This is an interesting situation here, where you've got this pair that's going to go into the back right here. Now, a lot of people here would probably rotate like this, and then solve it like this. But here, it's much simpler and faster just to solve this with RU moves into the back like that. So when you compare this to this, it's pretty clear which one's faster. Now this is another interesting case here, when you have this case going into the back left. And this is a terrible case, right? So in this situation, you actually wouldn't do that pair. You would want to solve this pair first, which you, by the way, can do rotationless, like that. Because then that sets up this case much nicer. So then you can either solve it into the back like that, or with a keyhole like this. Both of which then don't require rotation and are very easy to execute and don't have to do any L moves. Now here's a twist. What if you had this case, but it's your last slot? What do you do here? Well, in this case, I would still solve this into the back with LU moves, because you should have LU turning that's good enough to be able to do this, that's not like completely slow. It should not be faster to do a Y2 and solve this like this, rather than just doing this. One should be significantly faster, and that should be the LU one. And if you aren't at that stage yet, then you need to keep working on that until it is at that stage. So I'll use this as an example to demonstrate the kind of ongoing theme here as a rule. If you have a case where the edge is oriented, i.e. the side color of the edge matches with one of the colors on the side of the cube. So this edge is oriented, but these two are both misoriented because they match, but with the front color, right? So if the edge matches on the side, so it's an oriented edge, you can always solve that rotationless with just R or L moves. So here, you can solve this case very easily with that into the back. And then here, because these ones are both misoriented, so you might be thinking here, well, in the first tip I mentioned that you could do hedge. In this case, it's actually not worth it because you're going to have to rotate anyway to solve this last pair, right? So in this case, it's better to rotate first and solve that straight away and get it out of the way already, rather than here hedging this in and then having to rotate anyway, when a hedge is slightly slower than just a normal insert, right? So it's also balancing out if you're going to have to rotate anyway or things like that. So it is very complicated, but hopefully some of these examples kind of broke down to you some things that might make it a bit simpler and kind of gave you some guidelines that you can follow when you're looking at your own F12 pairs to decide if you need to rotate to solve that case. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.